Rationalism and empiricism aren't perfectly defined, but in general, empiricism says all knowledge requires experience, whereas rationalism says no it doesn't, that there are other sources of knowledge besides experience. So generally speaking, there's two ways the rationalists argue this. One is that we are born with innate knowledge and concepts, and this is known as the innate knowledge/innate concept thesis. Two, that we can gain knowledge purely using the resources within our minds, and this is known as the intuition and deduction thesis. So firstly, innate knowledge. Rationalists argue that some concepts/knowledge can't be accounted for by experience. For example, Descartes says our concept of God, the concept of an infinite being, can't come from experience because we, as human beings, are only finite and imperfect. Our experience isn't sufficient to account for something that's infinite and perfect. So Descartes says the concept of God must be innate. Similarly, Leibniz says our experience can only tell us what is the case, what's contingently true, whereas we know, for example, that 2 + 2 = 4 is necessarily true and can't be false. So again, experience is insufficient to account for our knowledge of what is necessarily true. However, empiricists like Locke and Hume give alternative accounts of how these concepts and knowledge are grounded in experience. Locke describes the mind at birth as a blank slate which experience writes on. We might derive mathematical truths like 2 + 2 = 4 by abstracting from experience, like seeing 2 stones added to 2 stones and getting 4 stones. And similarly, Hume describes how our concept of the infinite, although not directly experienced, can be derived by mentally extending our concept of the finite, which we do experience, on and on indefinitely. So that's innate knowledge, but rationalism also has intuition and deduction. And these are the mind's capacities firstly to see truth, rational intuition, and then derive what necessarily follows from these truths via logical deduction. So for example, if you know that all bachelors are men, and you know that X is a bachelor, then you can deduce, without any further experience and purely using logic, that X is a man. But this example is uncontroversial for both rationalism and empiricism because it's a conceptual or analytic truth. So really, the disagreement between rationalism and empiricism is about whether we can use intuition and deduction to acquire knowledge of the external world, of synthetic truths. Descartes' argument for the existence of God are examples of this. He attempts to prove God's existence using only the resources in his mind. As mentioned, Descartes argued that the concept of God can't come from experience, and through further deductions, Descartes concludes that this concept must have been put there by God himself, and so God exists. So Descartes has attempted to prove the synthetic truth that God exists without relying on any experience, using only the resources within his mind.